Good evening and welcome to 365 Days of Stories with Theo Mayer. Today it's day 91. It's multiple of 7, and so I'm telling stories from my own life. My life as a steward. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit today is fixing things, repairing things, knowing how things work. So in my last week, I talked about the power of wind and sailing. And on a sailboat, there's a lot of different things that you use, and they all seem to break at some point in time. And so it becomes pretty necessary to be able to fix things, especially if you're offshore somewhere and days away from a place where you can fix it. So the more systems you have on a boat, the more things there are to fix, because there are that many more things to break. And it then behooves you to learn a little bit about all of them. So if you just take a boat, for instance, you're going to have, your propulsion system, which is going to be wind to start with, which involves, cables and masts and booms and pulleys and winches and ropes and knots, sails, and maybe an engine inboard, maybe a motor, an outboard, maybe an electric outboard. But all these are things that can break and do eventually. Something always goes wrong with whatever it is that you're using. For a sail, maybe you have to put a grommet in somewhere, or it rips because you have the sail up in too much wind. So maybe you need a palm and a needle. A palm is something that fits in your hand. It loops over your thumb and typically has a little thimble that's in the palm so you can push a needle through heavy material. I should have brought one down. I have a couple of them, one for each hand, because if you're doing a big sail and you have a rip, man, your hands get tired pushing needles through the material, especially when it's, pretty tough Dacron or Kevlar or something like that. So machines have gotten so much more complex since when I first began to fix things. When did I first begin to fix things was, probably in Montana is when it really started, though when I was at home and a child down in our basement, my dad had a bunch of tools and I would make things, typically out of wood and wire and, whatever was around. But when I got to Montana and was running tractors and driving trucks, things would go wrong. And I think when they went wrong, that's when I really learned to cuss, because Ron and Dave both, when something broke, they expressed their unhappiness with the situation quite readily. And I think I became well-versed in using all those words that I heard them say when something would break of my own. Now, it's difficult to fix things. You got to have tools. I mean, when you're pulling things apart, stuff tends to be secured quite tightly. And when you're trying to get it undone, man, you can end up beating your hands up in many different ways, because in many cases you have to be a bit of a contortion artist in order to get into where things are placed. And you have to be careful too, especially with tractors or anything that has a power takeoff unit. You have to completely disengage that power takeoff unit so that when you're getting into the machine, there's not tension that's still built up that can release and do some kind of damage. Now, I'll tell you, it's intimidating. Think of a car that you drive and imagine something going wrong in that car, and not only trying to diagnose it, but then figure out how to get in there with tools to fix it. I have a 2008 Mercedes ML320. It's an all-wheel drive SUV. It's a diesel. And recently, something on the turbo broke. And without the turbo, the car still runs, but it doesn't run very well. I became very humbled driving up hills and watching my speedometer drop and drop as I went up the hill to the point where I was well under the speed limit before I got to the top. I don't think I'll be complaining about somebody who's going slow anymore, because maybe they're having trouble with their car. Well, I opted to fix it, and it was the intake manifolds, which is a big job. And so I didn't do it. I had a friend of mine who is a mechanic do it on a Sunday, and at a shop that he works at in town. And I showed up with the car and all the parts. And my friend Greg Bean ended up fixing it. It took him 10 hours. And if I had taken it into Mercedes-Benz, it was considered a 7-hour job, which is hard to believe. And I probably would have ended up paying at least twice what I ended up paying Greg. Not that that's the issue, but it was a very expensive fix. And something that I couldn't really do myself because I didn't have all the tools necessary to do it. But to watch a good mechanic get into an engine and be able to take it apart and somehow remember where everything goes and put it back together without taking pictures or anything, it's a remarkable thing. And it is really quite a testament to, a different sensibility, a different way of being able to see things. Now, Rudolf Steiner used to say that Rudolf Steiner was, the beautiful man that lived, I think he was born in the 1800s and lived somewhere into the 1900s and was basically responsible for biodynamic farming and anthroposophic medicine and anthroposophy and Waldorf schools and all kinds of stuff. And he used to say that it was very important that anything that we use, we have an understanding of how it works. And back in the day, I think that was very easily true. We could gain an understanding of things. When I was out there in Montana, automobiles, tractors did not have little computers on them. It was all mechanical, and you could fix everything and anything given the right amount of tools and enough time. And it was quite remarkable what we were able to fix out there in Montana. And remember, we were 45 minutes from town. And a tractor breaks down in a field. You don't haul it into town to fix it or get somebody to come out. You work it out and figure it out. And there's some pretty, serious stuff that can go wrong on a tractor or on a truck out there. But it was easy to fix things relatively. Yeah, it was a little bit hard and sometimes complicated, and sometimes, you drew a little blood on your knuckles, but we were able to fix things. I have old trucks, a 1989 Ford F-250 and a 1997 Dodge 2500 Ram, both of which I can still work on and fix. There's a lot of room around the engines. They're not very complicated. They're not crammed into the engine compartment. And most things are doable at this point. When I first got into doing things on my own, it was when I bought my first car, which was an old Triumph TR4, and I learned to do stuff on it and just continued. And I don't really like working on cars, but you learn and you realize how much you can do. And little by little, you gain confidence and knowledge. And at this point, there's YouTube videos on just about anything. Now, I've talked a lot about cars and trucks and a little bit about sailboats, but let's talk about all the other stuff that there is. If something breaks that you have and you use, okay, what are your choices? There's really nobody that fixes much anything anymore. So you could try to take it to someone and have it fixed, okay? Maybe a sewing machine or a vacuum cleaner, that would be worth it. Okay, you can throw it out and get a new one. That's an option. Or you can just take the thing apart and try to figure out what's wrong with it. I have had a number of friends who I watched do this. And something would break and they would just take the thing apart and figure out what was wrong with it and put it back together with a new part in it. And most of the time it worked, and worked for a long time after that. And so I started doing the same thing. It's amazing. I used to fix sanders because I did a lot of woodworking. So I had these little random orbital palm sanders. The bearings would go out in them. It was a Makita. It was a great little sander. So I'd get a new bearing. I'd get, new sanding pads. I'd get new brushes for the motor. And I kept these things going for years. And pretty soon the parts were not only more and more expensive, but you realize that you spend probably an hour fixing one thing or another on that. And suddenly you realize, well, I can get a brand new sander for $65. Well, I quit fixing those old random orbital sanders and I started getting new ones. Planned obsolescence. It's kind of a sad thing, but it's true at this point. These companies design things to break so that they can sell more. Cars are the same way. But if it's broken anyway, why not at least try to fix it in the process? You begin to understand how things work a little bit more. Now, cell phones, computers, there are some of us out there that understand them quite well and are able to fix these wonderful devices. I'm not one of those people at this point. But who knows? Maybe I'll have a chance to develop that skill at some point. The point of what I'm saying, to be a good steward, I think it's really important to think about minimizing your consumption of goods and really actually thinking about where those goods are coming from anyway. Are they coming from halfway across the world via air or ocean? Are they coming halfway across the country? Can you source locally? That's a very important thing. But the less stuff, we have to go and buy, the less we're kind of taxing the environment to provide us with things that maybe we need, but maybe more likely we want. So, something breaks, fix it. Try to fix it. Try to understand it. Try to understand all these things that we use. I think it's a very good practice, and I hope you'll get into it. All right, that's it for today. Hope you have a good rest of yours. Thanks for joining.